Welcome to the lecture 2, Quality Management and Processes. In this lecture, we will try to zoom in the connection between quality management and processes. We will also pull the connection in between quality management and functional safety because I assume that most of you are questioning how this course is related to the functional safety and why I need to understand quality management system. We will also go through how processes can be defined and measured. We will also mention some key performance indicators which can help us in measuring such a systems. Before we continue with the lecture, I want to explain the relationship in between functional safety and quality management. And I want to explain that because I want to fit this course, Automotive Quality and Project Management, to the Functional Safety Academy. We will start from that quality is a broader concept than safety. Safety refers to the identifying hazards of the processes, their causes and potential consequences. Safety is dealing with estimation and evaluation of the risks. Then we can say that safety is oriented to establish actions for avoiding, preventing, or reducing the probability of their occurrence, as well as continuously plan to mitigate losses and damages in the case of occurrence of the risk. We can say then that safety is always oriented to some kind of the risks, and those risks are for sure found in some kind of the processes. But quality is a bigger, integrated concept. Safety is an attribute of quality, and we can say that it is as well an object of the quality. Quality implies to identifying customer requirements. Then quality define objects and indicators for their measurements. Then quality is dealing with designing the processes for achieving those objectives. We can say also that quality is taking care of the assignment of the resources required to carry out those processes, as well as executing the processes according to their design. And one big thing is that measuring the processes performance and establishing a continuous improvement process for preventing and correcting non-conformances are the key postulate of the quality, but as well of safety. Going back to the quality and processes on the beginning of this lecture, I want to repeat some very key aspects of the previous lecture. What you can see on this picture. We talked about organizational triangle, and we said that processes, people, and system are the basic for the organizational strength and quality culture. Then we talked about quality program, which is explaining what are the key terms of the quality management system. We mentioned objects, we mentioned processes, we mentioned requirements, users, we mentioned evaluation, of course, measurements, and the quality term. Afterwards, we mentioned the major quality principles by explaining how they are used in the PDCA cycle. On the end, we zoom in all three quality dimensions and interconnect them with influencing criteria. You can see now that in all of the pictures here, we have processes as important factor, which is leading us that processes and quality management cannot live without having the full implementation of both. They're the parts of the same body. Now we are coming to the definition of the process. What is a process? Well, we can say that process is a series of steps and some kind of decisions which are involved in the way work is completed. Process is a series of stages in the time where the last stage is the product or some kind of result or any kind of goal. We may not realize, but Processes are everywhere and in every aspect of our leisure or in work. Well, more official definition, according to the ISO 9000 standard, says that the process is a set of interrelated or interacted activities that use input to deliver our intended result. Whether the intended result of a process is called output, product, or service depends on the context of the reference. Inputs to a process are generally the outputs of other processes, and the same way the outputs of processes are generally the inputs to the other processes. Processes in an organization are generally planned and carried out under control, and this controlled way is adding some kind of the value to the organization. A process where the conformity of the resulting output cannot be readily or economically validated is frequently referred to as a special process. Processes have to comply with a set of specific processes management requirements, such as being evaluated. Now we will talk about elements of the process and how the process can be formed. What are the elements of the processes defined in ISO 9001? This is the question which we will answer in this slide. On the diagram, you can see that there are some basic elements which are forming the process. And this basic diagram can be used in all kinds of industries or even for very simple processes in life. First phase is to determine what is the source of the inputs. For example, it could be the predecessor process at providers, at customers, or at any other part of the company or business unit. It could be an external or internal predecessor process, of course. Then we have the exact inputs to the processes, like what are the resources or what are the materials that we will use or any kind of requirements. The inputs will be used in next step called activities. In the phase activities, we are explaining in the process what should be done and what is the timing, how we will control, how we will check, how we will monitor and measure the process. Also, this phase must be formed in the way that we know when is the starting point by having some kind of entry criteria and what is the end point by having some exit criteria. This is really important. The activities will bring the outputs, which could be some kind of product, service, or any kind of decision. The outputs could be carried to some other subsequent process, external or internal one. The key of successful process is that it is efficient and, of course, measurable. The measure will give the real value of the process activities. The very important aspect is that process could not exist without having measure and boundaries or some kind of thresholds in the successfulness of it. As already said, process often comprise several procedures, and we will talk about procedures and zoom what are the procedures basically. Now we will answer on the question, what is then difference between process and procedure? Processes often comprise several procedures, which usually are described separately. According to the ISO standard, a procedure is a specified way to carry out an activity or a process. Procedure descriptions are binding instructions on how to perform specific activities. They are used to give an overview on how more complex activities, usually involving several roles, are performed. defining, among others, the sequence of steps and responsibility for each step. The procedure is the way how we are using the process, and procedure is not measurable. You are not in the obligation to measure any indicator of successfulness. One very simple example is that you have the process as action of making the soup, and the procedure is the recipe that explains how to make the soup. Quality management is a process and can be made up of several activities or sub-processes, such as performing quality assurance activities and evaluating and reviewing some product, performing assessment required by standard, doing lessons learned, and similar things. The procedures will list steps how the quality department and other stakeholders are doing them. The procedure can take several forms: simple text, flow chart, computer graphics, images, sound, or video recording. The term procedure is sometimes replaced by protocol in the, for example, medical field, or by operating procedures in other fields. On the slide set, I showed a very simple example of human resources management process. On the left side, you have sub-processes like recruiting an employee, for example, welcoming and onboarding the employees, training management, employee evaluation, offboarding. On the right side, you will see that for each of the sub-processes, which are forming process 3, there are one or even more procedures, like steps for recruiting in the recruiting an employee sub-process, then steps for welcoming the employee, onboarding steps, then steps for training preparation, steps for training performance. Then in the employee evaluation sub-process, you have the steps for employee evaluation. For example, how, who, and when this evaluation will start. For onboarding, you have returning equipment, closing all employee accounts, and similar. You can see that basically sub-processes are only grouping the procedures which are really telling you what you need to do in order to successfully finish some kind of process. I mentioned several times in the lecture that processes needs to be measured. Of course, there are some ways of measure the processes. And for that, we are using, for example, KPIs, which stands for key performance indicators, some kind of quantifiable measure of performance over time for a specific objective. KPIs provide targets for teams, milestones to instrument the progress, and insight that help people across the organization to make better decisions. Key performance indicators help every area of the business to move forward at the strategic level. And what makes a KPI effective? Now that we know KPI stands for key performance indicators, it is only as valuable as the action it inspires. Too often, you can see that organizations blindly adopt some kind of industrially recognized KPIs and then wonder why that KPI doesn't reflect their own business and fails to affect any positive change in the organization. One of the most important but often overlooked aspects of the KPI is that they are a form of communication. As such, they adhere to some rules and best practices as any other form of communication. Concise, clear, and relevant information is much more likely to be absorbed and reacted to. While key performance indicators and metrics are related, they're not the same. Measures are raw numbers. They are obtained by taking measurements, referring to the amount of degree of something, their direct mapping to the numbers. Metrics are summarized measures which have a meaning. Metrics are derived from measurements directly, usually in the form of ratio of some kind of percentage or fraction. They are used to track and assess a specific process. But KPIs are those metrics which express the performance of a company or project, either one which is ongoing or complete. Key, key performance indicators are metrics that provide a direct line of sight into progress towards objectives. KPIs map to specific outcomes and they are vital signs of performance. All KPIs are metrics, but not all metrics are KPIs. KPIs are the key targets you should track to make the most impact on your strategy business outcomes. KPIs support your strategy and help your teams focus on what is important and what is not. For example, KPIs can be the targeted new customer per month. Metrics measure the success of everyday business activities that are supporting your KPIs. While they are impacting your outcomes, they are not the most critical measures, for sure. Defining key performance indicator can be a very tricky business. The operative word in KPI is key because every KPI should relate to a specific business outcome with a performance measure. KPIs are often confused with some kind of business metrics, as I said. Although often used in the same spirit, KPIs needs to be defined according to the critical or core business objective. In order to define the KPIs, we need to follow important steps and to answer on the questions. We need to establish clear objectives. We need to have outlined the criteria. We need to collect the data and build formulas. And there are some questions like we need to answer, like what is your desired outcome? Why does this outcome matters to you? How are you going to measure your progress? How can you influence the outcome? Who is responsible for the business outcome? How will you know you achieved your outcome? And how often will you review progress towards the outcome? All those questions will help you in forming the really good KPIs. Well, now, since you have those questions, I will ask you to think about those questions while you're doing the exercise on the end of this lecture. We talked about some kind of KPIs, some kind of indicators, measures, and the way how we want to measure the process. But what I didn't mention is that we need to use SMART criteria for that. The letters from the SMART criteria comes from specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. In other words, we need to answer some questions like, is your objective specific? Can you measure progress towards the goal? Is the goal realistic? How relevant is the goal to your organization? And what is the time frame for achieving this goal? Now, when we go in each of the words from SMART criteria, we will ask even more questions. For example, specific. What exactly needs to be accomplished to be specific? Why do we need to accomplish the goal? For measurable, we will ask, how will we know we have succeeded? How much change needs to occur? How many actions or cycles will it take? For attainable, we will think about resources and do we have them for achieving some goal. Then is the goal a reasonable stretch? Is the goal likely to be uh, in the way to bring more success for us, which is really important? Then relevant. Will it be beneficial to management and to the team? Can we commit to achieving the goal and similar stuff? The relevant means how relevant will become for our part of the company. On the end, we have this time bound or timely. What is the deadline for reaching that goal? What is the criteria for reaching the goal in the time? And when will we begin to take those actions? For example, one thing is to deliver a project on time, but if it is a riddled with issues and bugs, this means very little. Therefore, measuring the number of issues per project and as a whole can help determine where there may be challenges when launching the project or some kind of product. And with time, this will improve the process and reduce frictions. Well, can you now think about what could be the smart objectives and smart KPIs for your process where you are involved in your uh, official workplace? Because now we will zoom in to the our next topic, which is project maturity model. And for a project maturity model, we will need some kind of those questions about how smart KPIs and what are the smart objectives. We are finally coming to key of our lecture, a process model. A process model is a structured collection of all the elements which are describing the characteristics of efficient process. And they are not describing what we are doing, they are describing how to do. And they are providing us some kind of starting point, experience of distinct business areas. They're providing us common vision and, of course, a framework for how we can prioritize all the actions. They are used basically to evaluate the status of some kind of the process. They are used as guideline for the process development and process improvement. They are used for comparing with the standard way of working. For example, in the project management, we have lack of managing risks. We have less updates of project plan. We have unclear human interface and role descriptions. We have some weaknesses in the communication among different engineering disciplines. And those problems are then pushing us in the direction that we need some kind of process maturity model for the project management. I have even more examples of the bad managing processes and where maturity model can help us. For example, in the requirements engineering, we have unclear system requirements for object design. We have lack on traceability. Then in quality assurance and configuration management, the importance of these processes is the less recognized. It is difficult to find good engineers who are interested to work with these processes. Then even more, in organization, processes are defined but very often not followed. Time and cost pressure in the project overall quality. Process tailored of defined processes is very sealed on and objective. Involvement of high-level management in process reviews is very, very bad. or it is not really followed. Then, for all of these problems that I mentioned right now, we are using the process maturities to help us to reduce such a problem in all of these areas. And basically what we will do is, after finishing with this lecture, we will jump in on the module which will explain directly all the benefits of Automotive SPICE maturity model. In this lecture, I will not give you the exact exercise. The exercise will be in the module uploaded, and before that, you will need to answer on some questions like what is the process, what is the procedure, and how we can measure them. What are the most important steps for defining KPIs and how to distinguish in between KPIs and metrics? Also try to think about what are the smart KPIs that we can create in the process which you are, for example, working on. Those answers will help you in the work, which will be, as I said, part of the exercise 2.